All right, let's go ahead and get started. I hope you guys are having a good week so far. Happy Thursday. My name is Sophie. I'm a member of the team here at Test Innovators. I will be the host of our webinar today, our ISEE What You Need to Know webinar. Really happy to have you all here. I want to start out by saying that today's webinar is going to be recorded, and I will be sending out a copy of the recording, ideally sometime tomorrow. If it's not tomorrow, though, then it will be on Monday. I'll send a copy of the recording to whatever email you registered for the webinar with. So if you need to head out early, you've got other stuff going on, totally understand. You will have the recording available to you to review anything. So if you need to hop off, you can't stay the whole time, or if there are certain things that we talk about that you want to revisit later on, you'll be able to do that. If you have an email address that you want me to send the recording to that is different from the email that you registered for the webinar with, just put it in the chat. I'll add it to my list. Throughout our webinar today, please feel free to type any questions that you have in that Q&A box. I'm going to spend some time at the end answering those, depending on how much time we have left. So if you submit something at some point throughout the webinar and I don't immediately answer it, don't worry. Just know that I'm waiting until the end for that Q&A section. And I believe that's enough housekeeping. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to just briefly mention is our partnership with ERB. Maybe you've heard of them. They are the publisher of the ISEE. So if you have already taken a test or scheduled your test date independently, then you probably did it through ERB's website. The goal of this partnership that we have with them is to help students gain familiarity with the test and reduce test anxiety so that they can ultimately demonstrate what they know effectively on test day. I always like to mention that all students have access to a free preparation option on our website. And I can send a link to that later on if you guys are interested, but all students have access to a free preparation option, and students with ISEE fee waivers can receive full access to all of our preparation materials for free. So if that is something that applies to you, I highly recommend reaching out to our support team. I'll have their information up at the very, very end so that we can get you set up with our materials based on that ISEE fee waiver. All right, so our agenda, a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. As I mentioned, it's going to be all about the ISEE. So we're going to start with an overview of the test. We'll look at how it's structured, the individual sections you can expect to see, and a teeny tiny bit about scoring. And then after that, we're going to talk through some test taking tips that are both general and section specific, as well as why it's a good idea to prepare. All right, so let's start with those basics. What is the ISEE? So the Independent School Entrance Exam, commonly referred to as the ISEE, or some people will say IC, you may hear it that way as well, is used by admissions departments during the application process to independent schools. It's typically one piece of the entire application. If you are at all familiar with how the admissions process to universities in the United States specifically works, then you've probably heard of tests like the SAT or the ACT, the ISEE, and there's another test, the SSAT, that you might have heard of as you're looking through admissions stuff, that essentially act as the grade school equivalent of the SAT and ACT. So you take the SAT or the ACT as part of your application when applying to colleges. You take a test like the ISEE as part of your application when you're submitting to independent and private schools. So I like to frame it that way. I think it makes it a little bit easier to understand how the test is used in the admissions process. The ISEE has a pretty specific testing schedule. There are 3 testing seasons, and you can take the test once per testing season. So that means that you can take the ISEE a maximum of 3 times a year, and you can only take it once in each of these 3 testing seasons. So As you can see, we have entered the end of the fall testing season. And if you have not taken a test or scheduled a test yet, if possible, I would really highly recommend you guys to see if you can get a test date before the end of the month. That way, you can get one test in, and then if you are unhappy with your scores or there's something specific you want to improve on, you still can test again in December, maybe January in this winter testing season, depending on when your application materials are due. Since, like I said, you can only take the test once. So if you miss this fall testing season, um, based on the majority of application deadlines, if a school is not rolling admissions where you can apply and be admitted at any time, most schools have deadlines that are in January. So you'd only have the opportunity to take the test the one time. The ISE at this point is administered both on paper and on the computer, so you can take your pick on what you think you or your student is going to be the most comfortable with. If you are really unsure, let me make a few comparisons for you guys to help you figure out what environment and format might be a good fit for you. So one thing to think about with the environment specifically, taking it at home versus at school versus at a prometric center. Um, so students taking the test at, say, a prometric center may be sitting next to an entire range of students taking all different tests. So you may be there to take the middle level ISEE, and you are also there with a 22-year-old college student taking the GRE. It's going to be a much wider range of people there to take standardized tests. At a school testing site, every student is going to roughly be the same age and there to take the ISEE. And then obviously taking it at home is a whole other environmental experience. So consider how these different pieces might impact you on test day. Something else to consider is the essay. Students taking the ISEE on the computer naturally will type the essay, and students who are taking it on paper will write it. So if you are a really slow typist, you don't have a lot of confidence with your speed or accuracy when it comes to typing on the computer, then that might be really difficult and honestly very anxiety inducing. And on the contrary, if you have really, really messy handwriting, if you struggle with making your writing legible, then you may not want to write your essay. That may not be a good idea. So those are also, you want to consider the format that's going to make things the easiest on you. Something else, your answer sheet. A lot of students, especially younger students that don't have a whole lot of experience with standardized testing yet, have trouble correctly bubbling their answers into an answer sheet. So they may skip a question, but forget to actually skip that line on their physical bubble sheet. On the computer test, this is not an issue since students enter each answer on the same screen as the question. And if you skip a question within a section and you need to go back to answer before your time is up, you'll be able to do that. It's not like your answers are locked in. You can move around while the section is still going on. But if you're worried about needing to keep track of a paper bubble sheet, then you may want to stick with the computer version. Generally, our advice is to take a practice test both ways. If you're really on the fence, you're just like, I don't know, I feel like there are pros and cons to both. Take a practice test both ways, see which one goes better, and then sign up accordingly. All right, there are several levels of the ISEE. Those include primary, lower, middle, and upper. One thing to really keep in mind whenever you're determining what level of the test you need to take is that the test is going to depend on the grade that you are applying to rather than your current grade level, which can be a little bit confusing. It feels natural, I think, to say, I'm an eighth grader. That must mean that I'm taking the middle level ISEE, and that's actually not true. It's all about the grade that you're applying to. So if you are currently an eighth grader, then that means that your applications are for your time as a ninth grader at school, that makes you an upper level ISEE taker. So always remember that the level of the test that you're taking is based on the grade that you're applying to, not the grade that you are currently in. All right, well, now let's look at the actual structure of the test. We're going to start with the primary levels. Primary levels are shorter and have fewer sections than the lower, middle, and upper levels. So each of the primary levels has a reading section and a math section. And then primary 2 over here also has this auditory comprehension section. For the primary levels, they're numbered based on the grade that you're applying to as well. So if you are currently a second grader applying for the third grade, you'll be taking primary level 3, not 2. The lower, middle, and upper levels of the ISEE have 5 sections each. Those are the verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, reading comprehension, mathematics achievement, and then the final essay section. We're going to go through all of these so you know what to expect, but you can also see that there are some breaks in this list as well. And I'll let you guys look at that for just a second. All right, let's actually take a look at each of these individual sections. We're really going to be focusing on the lower, middle, and upper level tests for the most part through all of these. So we're going to start with the verbal reasoning section. You can see up here how many questions you can expect to see and how long you have for that section. There are 2 types of questions that you will see on the verbal reasoning section. Those are synonym questions and sentence completion questions. So as you can see, we have an example of a synonym question over here. This is what those will look like. You will be given a word, you'll have your answer choices, and then it is your job to identify which word has the most similar meaning to the word that you were given. And then the other type of question that you will see are sentence completion questions. So you'll be given a sentence, you'll have a blank somewhere, and it will be your job to figure out which word best fits in the blank. On the upper level version of the test, I believe that there are also questions where you might have 2 blanks. So it might be a blank here and a blank here, and each answer choice will have 2 words. And you decide which pair of words fits best into the sentence. All right, next up is the reading comprehension section. This is going to consist of passages and questions based on the information that is provided to you in the passage. It's a little harder to give you, question examples for the reading comprehension section since they are going to specifically be based on whatever the passage that you've been given is. But there's a list over here of kind of the general topics that you can expect to see, and we do have this example question over here. So as you can see also, the lower level of the test has 5 reading passages. The middle and upper levels will have 1 more at 6. All right, those math sections. So there are actually 2 math sections on the ISEE, the mathematics achievement, which is probably easy to understand, but then quantitative reasoning, that is also actually a math section. The quantitative reasoning section is going to focus primarily on problem-solving skills and critical thinking. These types of problems, as you can see kind of in this example down here, don't typically require any significant calculations. They're more about numerical and logical reasoning. So this is how these questions will be presented. You'll have 2 columns, and then these will be your answer choices, making comparisons, things like that. It's about logic and reasoning. The mathematics achievement section, on the other hand, will focus on specific math content and skills that you are learning or have been taught in school. The general subjects covered on the mathematics achievement and quantitative reasoning sections will be the same, so it's not like there will be any major, differences between the topics that are being covered. It's more about how they're wanting you to solve the problem. And then there is the writing sample. This is the last section of the ISEE, and we'll talk about this a bit more later, but this is why it's really important to take full-length practice tests at least one full-length practice test before your test day if you can, because you have to have a lot of endurance to complete this test. And the writing sample being at the very end, you've completed 4 multiple choice sections. That is a lot. If you haven't practiced doing that and then having to write an essay at the very end, that may be extra difficult on test day. So really recommend you take a full-length practice test that includes this writing sample at the end. The writing sample is also the only unscored portion of the ISEE. So instead of receiving a numbered score like you will for the other sections, a copy of your writing is going to be sent to schools along with your score report. So it's something that is still going to be sent to admissions teams. They're still going to read them. There's just not a way for you to get a score on your essay before they're sent off along with your test scores. And then you'll be given a prompt to respond to. This is an example of a prompt that you might see. Okay, we're going to talk a teeny tiny bit about scoring. We're not going to go too far into scoring today because we actually have another free webinar that's all about ISEE scoring, reading your score report, breaking things down, because it can be really, really confusing. So if we finish this little section and you're still feeling pretty confused, I would highly, highly recommend registering for that webinar as well, because we go in depth on scoring there. So as you can see, students receive 1 point for correct answers and no points for incorrect or unanswered questions. So there is never a reason to leave a question blank. You should, at the very least, you have 30 seconds left. You're not going to have time to, you have no time to finish any more questions. It is a good idea to put something down for every question. You don't need to leave anything blank because at the very least, you might get a couple of extra points that way. It's also important to note that the ISEE is scored in it's called normative scoring based on your grade level. So what that means is that the way that your score is calculated and determined is based solely on all of the students that were in your exact same grade level that took the test. So even within, say, the upper level of the ISEE, those are students applying to grades 9 through 12. The students who are applying to the 9th grade will only have their scores compared to other students applying to the 9th grade, and that is how those scores will be determined. It's all based normatively on other students that are your age applying to the same grade as you. And then scores are also presented as stanines, which we will look at now. So percentiles, stanines, what do these words mean? A percentile, you can see this bottom row here. A percentile is just a way to compare student scores. So for example, if you scored in, say, the 34th percentile, that puts us just about here. It means that you did better than 34% of the students in your grade. So everyone to the left of you, you performed better than them. This is not the same as answering 34% of the questions correctly. Your percentile range only has to do with how your score compared to other students. Stanines are just another way to compare student scores, and they are derived directly from whatever your percentile score is. So whatever your percentile score is, and you can see that's kind of why this chart is set up this way, you can see what stanine that percentile corresponds to. Stanines of 4, 5, and 6 are average and represent the middle 50% of test takers. So you might notice that the percentile ranges for these middle stanines here are a lot larger than some of the more extreme stay nines, like 1 and 2, or 8 and 9. Like you can see, 9 only has a couple of percentile points included in this stay nine. So that means only the very top 3% of all test takers receive a stay nine of 9 on any given section, while 20% of students receive a stay nine of 5. So, like I said, we host webinars a little bit later in the year that completely break down how to read your score report. It's the only thing we talk about. So if this is still not totally making sense to you, definitely recommend getting signed up for that one. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an introduction at the very least. Okay, now let's get into preparation, beginning with just talking about why it's a good idea to prepare. So preparing ahead of time for a test like the ISEE allows for students to familiarize themselves with the format of the test, so they're not going in totally blind, grow their confidence when it comes to answering questions, and then minimize any anxiety that they may have when taking the exam, because that is super, super common. Test anxiety, feeling anxious or nervous about an important test is super, super common. But preparation can be a great way to mitigate that. So we have 3 steps that we recommend. That's what we're going to talk about for preparation, kind of these is the order that we recommend people prepare for the ISEE. So we have step 1, taking a full-length practice test. Step 2 is to review the results of that practice test. And then step 3 is to do targeted practice based on those practice test results. Like I said, we will break those down, starting with step 1, taking a full-length practice test. So taking a practice test, no matter when your official test date is, will provide you with familiarity on the test style. It'll give you an idea as to how difficult the test is, as well as the content. You'll go into it knowing what content to expect. This initial practice test, a lot of the times, can serve as a benchmark or a diagnostic test of sorts, so you can treat it as a jumping off point of the preparation process. We generally recommend taking this test as early as possible, but I really want to stress that it is never too late. Even if you have a test date, later this weekend or next week or in the coming weeks, taking a practice test is still going to take away a lot of the mystery of the exam's format and content, and just any anxiety that you have around the fact that you're showing up to take a test that you have literally never seen before. Taking a practice test, even just a couple of days before, can help get rid of that kind of initial layer of anxiety and confusion that you may have about the test. One thing to keep in mind when looking for practice tests to take, you want to, of course, make sure that the test is accurate. You want to make sure that whatever platform or company that you choose is creating their tests in a way that is accurate to the real ISEE. You want to make sure that it provides normative scoring so that you're getting accurate scores as you're testing. And then you also want to make sure that it tracks timing information. That way you're simulating the testing environment accurately. If your practice tests don't reflect the content of the official test well, then the benefits of actually taking that practice test will, of course, be limited. There are a lot of really great sample tests and practice resources available. We definitely encourage you to do your research, see what seems like a good fit for you. I will, of course, say we have spent years and years making our practice as accurate as possible, especially through our partnership with ERB. We continually ask for feedback every year to make sure our content is up to date. If you want to check out our practice materials, you can do so at isepracticetest.com. I'll have that link up at the end. But regardless of where you decide to do your practice, you want to make sure that you have done your research and that what you're taking is actually going to be helpful as you prepare. All right, step two is reviewing your results. This is probably the most important step since this is where you're learning all about your strengths, your weaknesses, helps you create your game plan for preparation. So you're going to want to start by identifying the areas that need the most improvement. Then, so whenever I say that, I'm thinking kind of about how you might use our platform. This is an example screenshot um, of an individual test section, how it breaks down your questions, what you got right, what you got wrong, what you skipped. So looking at this, we could see, we really need to work on measurement. Out of all of them, we only got one measurement question correct. Same with geometry. So can identify specific areas that look like we, need a little bit of help. Then you're going to go back to your practice test. You're going to go through and review every question that you answered incorrectly, every question that you skipped. And then I also like to encourage students to review any questions that they flagged to come back to later, even if they got it right, because that probably means that you struggled or were a little bit confused. It's a good idea to go and refresh yourself on those skills. Then on our platform specifically, whenever you take a practice test and are reviewing your results, there are answer explanations available for every question. So make sure that you read the answer explanation, whatever is available with the resources that you're using, and make sure that you would know how to do that question if you were to see something similar on a future test. And then finally, you're going to want to learn and implement some test taking strategies, things that show you how to arrive at the correct answer and how to avoid choosing any of the wrong answer choices, especially if you're unsure for questions that you just are not immediately confident that you know how to solve. So, kind of in summary, looking at some overall trends first, what sections went well, what sections would you like to improve? Then you can dig a little deeper. What specific question types, so like maybe we reviewed our test and we saw, okay, quantitative reasoning is by far our weakest section. Let's actually go into our quantitative reasoning section, and this is what that would look like here, and see what subtypes, what specific question types, subject areas, what did I do a good job at? Because it is really, really important to also pay attention to and celebrate the things that you are good at. I think with test preparation, especially, we get really focused on improving our weak spots and, seeing those numbers improve. But you really should also give yourself a pat on the back for the things that you do well at, your strengths. Okay. And then at this point, also really recommend considering time management as well. Did you manage your time effectively on each section? Are there any sections that you totally ran out of time to answer all of the questions? Things like that. And then step three is to do targeted practice. So this is the step where all of the actual learning takes place. Again, you want to review every question that you got wrong, every question that you skipped, every question that you got right but flagged to come back to later. Read those answer explanations and then do targeted practice exercises based on those skills. Um, for specific subject types, some kind of additional ideas as to how you can prepare using your practice test results. So for verbal questions, you can add words that you don't know to your vocabulary list, and this includes words from the answer choices. So if on questions that you got wrong in the verbal reasoning section, you didn't know that synonym, but you also don't know what the other three answer choices were. Add all of those to your vocabulary list, not just the word that you didn't know. See if you know any of the words. For reading, for example, practice finding textual evidence. We're going to talk through some more strategies in a little bit. I just wanted to mention a few right off the top. Finding line numbers to support correct answers and determining, what information in the passage made each incorrect answer wrong. Things like that. That's what this step, part of what this step three is about. Targeted practice and learning strategies. And then the kind of unofficial step four is to repeat. So repeat steps 1 through 3 until test day. One recommended study schedule is to take a practice test once a week or once every other week. It really depends on how close your test date is and what your goals are. At this point in the year, I would say most people can benefit from taking a test every single week. That's what I would probably do. It's also a good idea to engage in more frequent short practice sessions rather than a handful of really long cram sessions. Studies have shown just that that helps with retention. Um, so that's also a good idea to keep in mind. We have a blog post that is all about creating a test prep study plan. If you're kind of like, I have no idea where to even start. Like okay, I take a practice test and then I need to review results and I need to do targeted practice, but like, what does that look like? That blog post is a really great resource for that. We have sample study schedules built out essentially where you take a practice test once a week and then you have allotted time to review your results and then allotted time to work on specific subject areas. If that's of any interest to anybody, just let me know and I can include the link to that blog post in my follow-up email with the recording for the webinar. All right. So we're going to do some test taking tips and strategies. We are going to talk about kind of just some general tips, but then we'll get more specific with the sections after that. So a lot of these will probably be familiar to you on some level, but it's always a good idea to review them and actually talk through the best way to implement them. So the first one is the process of elimination. Since all of the questions are multiple choice, you know that the answer is always going to be there. So don't forget to use your answers to help you find the correct one. You don't need to, try to stay calm if you don't know, immediately what the answer is to a question. Use those answer choices to at least help you start narrowing things down. So if you don't know the answer, elimination, great place to start. Cross off answer choices that you know are wrong, and then make an educated guess based on what is left. Because at the very least, this is going to increase your chance of choosing the correct answer. We have the guessing strategy. The main thing about guessing that I just want to reiterate is that there is no penalty for wrong answers on the ISEE. So you really want to make sure that you answer every question. Make sure you have something down for everything, especially if you run out of time. There shouldn't essentially be any missed questions on your test unless you were just, really involved in a final question that you were sure you could get right before time ran out and, then you had a couple of leftover. But really encourage you guys, make sure you have something, even if it's a complete random guess, down for every question because there's still a chance that you'll get points for that. Time management, one of the most important skills that you can practice. Using your time effectively throughout the test in every section is critical. One thing to keep in mind is that every correct answer is going to give you the exact same number of points. And your goal, of course, is to answer as many questions correctly as possible. So don't waste valuable time on a really, really hard question that you don't even know if you're going to get it right. But, you're like, I want to try to work through this. I want, you get it in your head that you want to try to finish this question. When really, you could instead have answered 3 easy questions and secured yourself those points in the exact same amount of time, and then guessed on that question and had the same, likelihood of getting that hard question right. So, don't waste time on those super, super hard questions, especially not at the beginning of the section, whenever time is really, really important. So, some specifics when it comes to managing your time. First step recommend is to group questions by difficulty when you read them. So easy and hard. Every time you read a question, ask yourself, do I know how to do this? If the answer is yes, absolutely, go ahead, do the question. So proud of you. If the answer is more of a maybe or like, I don't really know, maybe even I have never seen this before in my entire life, circle it in your test booklet, mark it on your digital sheet, however you're taking the test, come back to it later. If you are taking the test on paper, I really encourage you to just mark an answer for the question on the bubble sheet. Instead of trying to skip, go ahead, mark an answer on your bubble sheet. You'll have marked in your actual test booklet, I want to come back to this question. But this will keep you from your bubbling getting off track. You're not having to keep track of, okay, wait, I need to keep this line blank because I haven't answered this question yet. You don't have to worry about that. And if it's a hard question that you don't have time to come back to later, you already have guessed something and you have secured yourself at least the potential of kind of freebie point on that question. So I recommend still putting something on your bubble sheet if you're taking it on paper. And then you want to do this for every section, for every question of the section. So with this strategy, you're securing all of those points for those easy questions first. And then after you've gone through the whole section and answered the easy questions, you can go back to those hard questions you marked and work on those. Want to make sure that you check the clock every once in a while you're testing to keep yourself on track. It's a good idea to know generally, how much time you have for each question based on the section that you're in. That way you know whether you need to pick up the pace a little bit or if you have time to slow down. I definitely don't mean like, okay, I have 45.2 seconds to answer every question in this section. I generally mean more, okay, if you have 30 minutes for this section and you know there's 30 questions, maybe at the halfway mark, check in with yourself. Okay, it's been 15 minutes. Have I answered about 15 questions? Am I about halfway through, overall? Check in with yourself about that. If this is something that also sounds a little scary to you, totally get it. You're not alone. That is another reason I would really recommend taking timed practice tests ahead of time. That is what is going to help you get comfortable with completing everything in the amount of time that you'll be given. All right. Okay, so some section specific tips, starting with that verbal reasoning section. Vocabulary is, of course, the most important part of preparing for this section. Even just setting aside, 10, 5, 10, 15, if you're feeling crazy minutes every day for vocabulary can help you improve immensely. And there are lots of ways to do vocabulary. You can make it a little fun. You can make the classic flashcards. You can write sentences that contain vocabulary words, maybe try to write a short story, a creative piece, something like that. Use as many vocabulary words in it as you can. You can draw pictures. Maybe you're more art inclined. Draw pictures of the words. Challenge yourself to use vocab words in everyday conversation, on your way to school, with your parents. Impress your teachers, really just finding ways to implement that practice kind of into your daily life or in ways that are interesting for you, that are going to be a little bit easier for you to engage with. And something that I feel like is almost a hack that people forget about, do not neglect root words, prefixes, and suffixes. This can totally change whether or not you get a question right or wrong on the verbal reasoning section when you encounter an unfamiliar word. If you get to a question on the verbal reasoning section and you're like, what the heck is this word? If you have spent some time studying common roots, prefixes, and suffixes, chances are high that you'll be able to break apart that word at least partially, and then you might be able to kind of deduce its meaning with the answer choices. So do not neglect those. That way you can kind of break unfamiliar words apart and maybe still get to the correct answer. So as I mentioned earlier, first part of the verbal section is going to be those synonym questions. We really recommend covering up answer choices when possible. See if you can come up with your own answer first so you're not immediately being swayed by incorrect answers. And then the second part of the verbal reasoning section is that sentence completion section. So similar to the synonym questions, we really recommend you start by covering up your answer choices, see if you can come up with something first. So come up with your answer, then you read your answer in the sentence to make sure it makes sense. Then find the answer choice that is closest to the one that you came up with, and then finally read the answer choice again in the sentence to make sure that it sounds correct. You want to make sure that you are paying attention to directional words, so things like although and despite, because those can really change the meaning of the sentence. You want to make sure that you're focusing on how nouns and adjectives are used. Those will give you clues about what goes in the blank. And then don't forget to think about the overall meaning of the sentence as well. Don't get focused on just one specific part that the word is in. Make sure you're keeping in mind the entire context of the sentence. Reading comprehension. The most important rule of reading comprehension really is that the passage is always going to provide you with all of the information that you need to answer a question. So if any part of an answer choice doesn't match the information that was provided in the passage, then you know it is automatically wrong. You don't have to second guess yourself on that. Just like those verbal reasoning questions, whenever possible, after you read a question, see if you can come up with your own answer before looking at the answer choices. This just helps you eliminate wrong answer choices early on and find the best answer based on your own knowledge rather than immediately being pulled in a bunch of different directions by the answer choices. Generally, you're going to want to avoid answer choices that are too extreme. So you can kind of see the list there, words like only, always, never, other extreme words. Unlikely to be the correct answer. You should only choose them if you are totally sure that this is what the passage is saying. These are kind of easy questions to be tricked on, you know? So it's like if in the passages it says, some people like vanilla ice cream, and one of the uh, answers to a question is everyone likes vanilla ice cream. You may think, oh, okay, well, they did mention people liking vanilla ice cream in the passage. I bet that's the right answer. But that extreme word of everyone, like saying everyone always likes vanilla ice cream, is what makes that incorrect. And then this is also true for words that are too general or too specific. So anything that's kind of on the extreme end, just because things are typically a little more complex than always, only, never, whatever. So these answers are not never, they're not never correct. There will be instances where, this is true. This is what the passage is saying. You just want to make sure that you are completely aware of that when picking that answer choice. Time management is especially important for reading comprehension because these passages can get a little bit long. So while you're reading, it's a good idea to kind of skim and underline important information while you're going. Things like repeated words, first and last sentences of each paragraph to get the kind of general topic of the paragraph. That way, whenever you're answering questions later on, you're not having to reread multiple paragraphs. You've kind of annotated and made notes for yourself. With all that in mind, you of course don't want to rush. Rushing causes you to overlook important information, so it's definitely there's a balance with it, and that's why practice is really, really helpful because you can kind of find your own personal balance with that. Math sections. Okay. First, be sure you're reading the question carefully. Underline important information. So, words and numbers that indicate the quantities and relationships and calculations that you'll need to answer the question. Um, After you solve the problem, this is something that I always was terrible about on tests, especially math questions. Check that you answered the given question. Look back at what the question was actually asking you to find and make sure that that matches your answer. I feel like math questions so often, if you miss even, one word in that question, it changes what it wants you to do, and then they'll have answer choices that are there to kind of trip you up a little bit, that are if you solved for the wrong thing, hey, that incorrect answer is here and you can choose it. So just make sure that at the very end, once you have your answer and you're selecting it, go back just one more time, read the question, make sure that you are answering what they're asking you to do. And then of course, don't forget to write down your work on your scratch paper. It's what it's there for. Some other general strategies, estimation can be a really good tool to start with and eliminate wrong answers. For some questions, it makes sense before you start solving it to kind of ballpark what you think the right answer should be. And what I mean by that is like, is it going to be a positive or a negative number? Is it going to be a whole number or a decimal? Is it going to be in the single digits or is it going to be in the hundreds of thousands? Trying to ballpark at the very, very beginning where you think the answer is probably going to end up. For other questions, the jumping off point is actually in the answer, so it's helpful to work backwards. If there's an unknown quantity, you can substitute the answer choices for that unknown quantity to see which is correct. Always start with the middle answer choice because they will be ordered from least to greatest or greatest to least. And if you start with the middle answer choice, you can minimize the number of answers that you need to substitute. Math questions can also be pretty challenging to solve abstractly. So in cases like those, it can be helpful to use your own numbers that you make up to determine the answer. And then drawing pictures can be helpful for things like word problems and questions with shapes and graphs, help you visualize things a little bit more. And then the writing section. Like I said, the writing portion of the ISE is not scored, but that does not mean that it's unimportant or that you shouldn't prepare for it. Some things to keep in mind for the writing section. You want to choose a topic that showcases something you care about, something that you're familiar with. You want to write in a way that shows you in a positive light, since this is your chance to show the schools that you're applying to who you are outside of school. You have a really limited amount of time to write, so managing your time effectively is really important. What we typically recommend and then after that, saving another 2 to 5 minutes for review so you can check for punctuation, grammar, spelling, things like that. So you're not just writing, and then boom, it's gone. And you're like, I don't even know what I just submitted. So try to save yourself a couple of minutes at the end for review. Ideally, your essay is going to have a clear, focused topic that directly answers the questions that you have been given. It'll be structured a lot like essays that you've written in school as well. So an introduction, 2 to 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Your writing should include examples, specific details, things that really make your writing come alive and unique to you. And then lastly, of course, most importantly, express yourself. Schools are very genuinely trying to learn more about you and what you care about, so let them honestly get to know you. Okie dokie. If you have any questions, which I know that we do have some questions. Sorry, I sped up a little bit at the end there just because I knew that you guys had some good questions. I wanted to make sure that we had time to get to them. So let me go ahead and look through these, see what we can get answered. We have a question about qualifying for ISEE fee waivers. To figure out if you qualify, I would just go to ERB's website. They have specific information on how you can figure out if you qualify and then how to obtain one if you do qualify. So I would definitely go check out ERB's website. Um, This is a good question. If you take a test in November and you're not happy with your score, you take another test in December, but it's actually not better than the first one, can you stick with the score from the first test, or does it automatically send your latest score to schools? This is something that you actually have control over. So we get this question a lot about just generally, are your scores automatically sent to schools? And they do not have to be. So whenever you register for the test, you will be given the option, if you haven't already done this and seen this, it'll ask you, do you want us to automatically send your score to schools? And this can sound convenient. So I think sometimes people are like, sure, yeah, automatically send them. We recommend you don't do that for this very reason. If you take the test in November and you're kind of like, I'm okay with this score, I think I could maybe do better. You test again in December and you're like, actually, my first score was better. I want to submit that one. If you didn't automatically send your scores, then you can select those November scores as the scores that are sent to schools. You don't have to use those December scores at all. Usually it's not the end of the world if you do automatically send your scores and you have more than one score report, but that does really depend a lot on the schools that you're applying to. Some schools are really flexible with their applications. Just generally, they'll accept any number of score reports. They'll kind of use them all as part of your, the holistic review of your application. There are other schools that are very, very particular about the fact that they only want one set of scores to be sent to them. So if you register for automatic score submission and you test, then that is all you can do. Even if you're like, "Oh man, I really wish I could have tested again," you know, in the winter season, it won't matter at that point because you've already submitted your one singular set of scores. So that is one thing to keep in mind. You do have control over it. You just have to make sure that you didn't select automatically send scores to schools. Is there a time requirement that the test must be finished by? I'm not totally sure if you mean the actual test or if you mean like submitting your test scores to schools. In the case of the actual test, yes, it's a timed test. It's like comes in just at under 3 hours, I believe, for lower, middle, and upper levels. There's very specific timing and things like that for each of the sections, but that will be taken care of in whatever format that you take the test in. If you mean is there a time requirement for score submission to the schools that you're applying to? That will 100% depend on the schools that you're applying to. Schools have a wide variety of deadlines and things for application materials. Some of them are also specific about specific application materials. So maybe your whole application isn't due until January, but they want your scores by December. It really just depends. So if you're not sure, would definitely recommend you checking out the websites of the schools that you are applying to or reaching out to their admissions teams. Um, should you skip questions that you don't know? No. Hopefully I really drove that point home for you guys. Um, if you well, I guess it depends on how I'm interpreting this question. So skipping questions that you don't know, yes, so that you can answer all of the easy questions first and come back to them later, but skipping and not putting an answer at all, no. Definitely make sure that you put an answer down for every question. When taking the ISEE practice tests, are the questions different? If you are talking about our platform specifically, we have a lot of ISEE practice tests. We have some that we've created and vetted through ERB. We also have some official ERB practice content. So there are multiple tests with different questions depending on the level of access that you purchase with us. We do have a free preparation option where you can take a free sample test, but that free sample test will just be a one-time test. You won't have like multiple free sample tests. Can you take a paper test and a computer test? Yes, you can sign up for whatever, as long as it's within that one test per testing season. As long as you're following that rule, you can go back and forth between testing types as works for you. For the math sections, will you get paper or something to write and solve? Yes. So whether you're taking the test on the computer or on paper, you will have scratch paper for the math sections. This question, the essay will be sent to two schools. If you had three schools listed, will those go to all schools or only the ones that require? Um, I think that I maybe the way that I worded that was a little bit confusing. I was saying that your essay will always be sent to schools. So not a specific number of schools, just any school that you submit your um results to will also get a copy of your essay. And it is part of the ISEE. So it's not, a lot of schools have application essay requirements. Those are separate from the ISEE. This writing sample is connected fully to the ISEE. It's just like any of the other section. It's just like the verbal reasoning section. The only difference is that you can't get a score for it because it's writing. So it's something that essentially admissions teams will give you their own score. They won't give you a score, but that's kind of how it works, is that there is no official score that you get, but it's still as much a part of the ISEE as every other section. Hopefully that makes sense. Taking the same practice test twice, is there any benefit to that? Probably not, just because those are questions that you have already completed. And if you have gone through and reviewed your answer choices, read the answer explanations, done practice exercises, it's going to serve you better to take a new practice test so that you can see if you actually have improved in those areas and can apply that. Because, of course, when you take the real test, you won't have seen any of those questions before. So it's a good idea to keep your content fresh, I would say. We got a question about one of our crash courses. So we have crash courses that we host for lower, middle, and upper level ISE students that essentially provide you with um, a much more in-depth overview of the test and specific strategies and skills. It's pretty much everything that you need to know going into the test. This person is saying that their test date is the 15th, or we have a class on the 15th. Their test is on the 14th. If you let me know what your level is, I can see if we have anything available sooner than that. It looks like we also have some comments about the blog post that I mentioned, that creating a test prep study plan blog post. I will share that with you guys. The clock on the test, is it a countdown or a count up? It is a countdown. So if you're taking it on the computer and you have like a digital clock, it will be counting backwards, not up. What is the recommended minimum number of body paragraphs for the essay? 2 to 3? Yep, you are right. 2 to 3 um, body paragraphs, just like the essays that you're writing in school, which are typically intro, 2 to 3 body paragraphs, and then that conclusion. You guys have so many great questions. I'm doing my best to answer as many as I can. I'm trying to also figure out, there are some repeats, so I'm trying to kind of see how much I can fit in. Um, yeah, so we're getting some questions about the length of the test. I think that the lower level test is, I want to say at this point it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, and the middle and upper levels are 2 hours and 40 minutes. That may change a little bit every once in a while. They'll add a minute to this section, take a minute away here, or like add a little bit here and there. But I want to say that that's approximately where we're at. It's around 2.5 hours for everybody. When you take the test in November, when can you retake it? If you take it in November, then you will be able to retake it anytime. And since that's the fall testing season, um, fall testing season ends at the end of November. Winter testing season starts beginning of December. So you could take a test anytime in December onwards, since you'll be in the winter testing season then. If you already registered for a test to send your scores to school, but you haven't actually taken the test, can you change it? Yes, you can totally go into your account and change it to not have your scores be sent automatically. This is a really good, very common question about sending specific stay nines from different tests. So, like, if you have a better day with verbal reasoning, but a worse day with mathematics achievement, and then the reverse on your next practice test, can you send individual sections? And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. It's commonly called super scoring, and it's not something that you can do on the ISEE. You can only submit full score reports to schools. Like I said, some schools are very flexible and open to the idea of getting multiple score reports. So if you have two tests where one section is stronger on one and the other is stronger on the other, it may make sense. You might call them and ask them what their opinion is on that, on, what, if you should submit both, if they're willing to look at both. Some schools are very open to that. Like I said, other schools are very particular about only receiving one set of scores. So I would definitely look into the schools that you specifically are applying to. I have a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to keep answering questions for a couple more minutes. But for everyone else, I want to kind of wrap things up. Um, you can check out our site at isepracticetest.com. Feel free to contact us with any questions. We are here 7 days a week, and our support team is totally stellar. Like, they're just the best. Like I said, if you also have any questions about getting your accommodations set up with our platform, that means if you already have your accommodations registered with ERB. So we don't do any of that. We just, if you have an accommodation, you get all of our practice materials for free. So if you need help setting that up, definitely reach out to us. Totally recommend checking out our free ISEE prep guide as well. It has everything you need to know about the test, as well as tips and strategies for each individual section. I will send a link to that in the email with the webinar recording and the link to the blog post either tomorrow or Monday. As a thank you for joining us, please feel free to use this little coupon, this ISEE Need to Know, for $15 off of our valedictorian package for the middle and upper levels. And that is all for now. Like I said, I'll stay on for another minute or two to answer some of these last questions. If I didn't get to your question, I'm really, really sorry. But like I said, our support team is fantastic and they can answer anything that I didn't get to today. But that is all for now. We'll have a couple of more questions. You won't miss anything else. So if it's time for you to head out, thank you so much. Hope you have a good rest of your week and good luck with any of your upcoming test dates. All right, so let's see what the last couple of questions that we can get to are. And I'm sorry if there are any questions that I have not answered yet. We have a lot of them. So there are some that if I've missed, I really do apologize. And I really highly recommend you reach out to our support team. Um, if I test with accommodations, is that going to be indicated anywhere on my score report? No, not at all. Your score report is not going to show whether or not you had accommodations of any kind. So if you require additional time or another accommodation, the schools you're applying to aren't going to be notified in any way. I've gotten a quite a few questions along the lines of what is a good ISEE score, or why is my ISEE score like not as good as some of my other standardized um, scores? What is a competitive ISEE score? Um, so the purpose of the ISEE, like I said, is to provide school admissions panels with some kind of standardized metric that they can use to compare applicants. So because of this, it's of course an important part of your application, but it is important to remember that that's all that it is. It's just one part of your application. So your transcript, your interview, your recommendations, your essays, other components of the application are all critical uh, to success. That said, we have seen that low scores can be an obstacle in admissions at times, especially for really competitive schools with a large number of applicants. I like to mention that the Test Innovators website, our website, displays data on score ranges that have historically made students competitive applicants at a wide variety of different schools. These are designed to provide just directional information, but they can be really, really helpful with goal setting and figuring out where you are. So if you want to um, kind of look and see how your scores might compare with the schools that you're applying to, you can look up ISEE target score data test innovators, and that should take you right to that page. It's organized by state, I believe, so schools within every state, and then we have some international schools as well. I would use that as a resource. Like I said, it's by no means absolute. So there's not any guarantees that you will be accepted or rejected based on those scores, but it can be helpful with goal setting and understanding where you are kind of in um, relation to other kids that are probably applying to those schools. Okay. I know we still have some questions, but we are over time, you guys. So I, like I said, really encourage you to reach out to our support team with any of those additional questions that we didn't get to today. I know you're all going to do great. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and a great weekend.